Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final seminar in our Women in STEM series. Thanks to those joining us online and those of us here in the Children's Medical Research Institute building. I'd just like to start by doing our welcome to country. I would like to acknowledge the Darug people of the Darug Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways in Westmead where we're meeting today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of all lands from which all meeting participants are joining today, as well as all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Today in our final seminar in this series, I welcome Dr. Lorel Colgin, who is the Head of Marketing and Communication here at CMRI, which may seem like an interesting interview subject because you think this is about science, not about marketing. Well, actually, Lorel started her life as a researcher and spent half of her career so far as a researcher. And so what we're trying to talk about this week is not just science careers, but actually how you can find different avenues to enter different parts of a science career and what that can look like. So thanks for joining us, Lorel.
Thanks, Monique.
I should also say that Lorel organised this entire series as well. So big props to Lorel for that. You have taken, as I just said, a very different path through your scientific journey. Can you talk about when you first knew that you had a love for science and what that looked like as a little girl?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people that end up becoming scientists, have a similar story where, you're a curious kid and you just love learning about everything and you have questions about everything. You're always like, why? Probably annoying all of the adults around you. But why? I guess interest in science in particular, not just asking a lot of questions, began with my great grandmother who raised me for about the first 9 years of my life. And she used to be a nurse during World War II, but stateside, so she didn't see any action or whatever, but still she was one of those tough ladies that knew how to take care of herself and was no nonsense and dealt with things. Broken toe, she'd mended. One time, some annoying cousin or whatever threw dirt in my eyes, and she was doing surgery, practically taking the little bits off my cornea. And she just handled everything, whatever life threw at her, and she always had answers for everything. And so I would just go to her and say, how is this working? And what's this rock I found? And she'd say, oh, that's a geode. And I was like, oh, tell me about all of these rocks. So I was gathering rocks, and she was saying, a geologist studies rocks. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be a geologist when I grow up. I always went through phases. I've got to be this for a period of time until my interests changed. And she had books, so many books that, even before I could read, I would, just look at the pictures of, ancient Egypt and Greece and China and things. And of course, there came a stage where I wanted to be an archaeologist because I found out, oh, those are the people that, study all of these ancient cultures. And, I started teaching myself ancient Egyptian from the books and things and the translations that had been made. And, I just really got into every subject wholeheartedly when I was a kid, when, most teenagers, I think, had photos of bands and things on their walls. I had photos of Mars because they just sent some sort of probe to Mars, and there was all of these, new pictures of the landscape, and I had them, hanging up above my bed. And I read all of the Scientific American articles on it, and then decided I wanted to be an astrophysicist. So, so I went from one subject to another, and so I loved, learning, and I loved, everything in the world and wanting to understand how everything in the world worked.
And so that may be a common thread, as you said, to a lot of scientists, this questioning and being intrigued by things. But what is quite different about you is that when you were in year 7, you decided to leave traditional schooling and started homeschooling, but you homeschooled yourself. Can you talk about that?
I guess I'd say I quickly ran out of people that knew the answers to things. But, I also had a difficult sort of home situation. And that's something I wanted to bring up, in this seminar, because we've heard from Ane, who, had to move countries and learn new languages and work as a cleaner and people that, have to, I guess, work hard to get where they are. And it was very much like that with me, and that, my grandmother was very supportive, but the rest of my family was really quite poor. And we lived below the poverty line, and nobody had, completed college, ever that I knew of. But at the same time, it was, I was one of those people that's like, oh, I love this. I'm just going to go for it, like without paying, any attention to people saying you can't do something. Or that it's difficult or hard, but part of, living below the poverty line meant, things were just like, really tough. You moved around a lot, sometimes you had no food and you got by, reading and putting your brains someplace else. And I loved school because that was my escape from everything, it was escape from, chores and, crazy home life. And, I go to school and it was like peaceful and learning. And then there got to be a point where, we'd moved like 17 times or something over a few years. And I just got tired of, reintroducing myself to new schools and trying to catch up with whatever subjects they were in. And I just wanted to get off this crazy ride. And my mother mentioned that somebody she worked with was homeschooling their child. And I was like, you can do that? I mean, it sounded like really fascinating. I was like, sign me up. And like I said, my mother, couldn't teach me anything, but she took me to the library and, every week I would check out my maximum number of books that I was allowed to check out. And so, I read everything from like history and Charlemagne and the Roman Empire to like books on, tectonic plates and volcanic activity and how the earth worked. And I loved, everything that I read. And you were required to do like quarterly exams just to make sure you were staying up with your studies and on par with other people in your class age. So that was year 8 that I was doing that, because year 7 was probably my last year in school. So year 8, I was doing that. And when I got my test scores back, they all came back as post high school level, and I was like, wait, why am I going to go to high school if I'm already post high school level? So I was like, using logic here, I was like, that sounds like a waste of time. So I decided to, just kind of skip the rest of it and go straight to college, where they had maybe the answers I was looking for that nobody else could answer. So
I'll take you a step back, because from what you told me, it wasn't just as simple as I'm going to go to college at the age of what I presume is like 14.
Yeah.
You had to actually state a case to an official board of studies to convince them you were mature enough to go to university.
Yeah, because you can't drop out of school until you're 16. So eventually, I got all of these local news headlines of, high school dropout, does good, because, I was essentially trying to be a high school dropout, but I had to go to the school board and, and I was working, I cleaned theaters actually in the morning from like 4 a.m. I had a work permit because you're not allowed to work below 16, but, we were poor. So I had a work permit and still worked in the mornings at 4 a.m. And so I was able to buy myself a really nice dress, and I went before the school board and showed him my grades. And I said, let me out, let me go to college. And, I made the case that, I'm not like dropping out to like not do anything with my life. I'm dropping out to, take it further. And like, don't hold me back was really my message to them. Yeah.
And so what was it like being in this adult environment at what you call college in Australia, we call university? What was it like at that age going to university?
It was great. I was always like, my mother used to call me her 30-year-old midget because I was always way more mature for my age. And that was when I was 3, So, when I was preparing to start, university essentially, because I still had to get a high school equivalency diploma. I went to classes with adults that, had dropped out of high school for lots of different reasons and had to get jobs and trades or, whatever they had to do to get by, but they wanted to go back and get the high school diploma. And so I made friends with these people that, were 30, 40, 50. I mean, some of them were in their 60s that they decided to go back and get the high school diploma. So, I met people of all ages when I was studying, and, they became my friends because you're just friends with your classmates and you care about their lives and things. So yeah, when the school board said, it's like, what about, the impact on your social life when you skip high school? And I was thinking, it's just going to be a positive impact on my social life if I skip and go to college. Yeah.
And so at what point when you were studying did it all come back to science? And when were you very clear that that was the direction of your studies from that point on?
I think, it was when you had to choose what your major was going to be in university, because I covered a lot of things getting my high school equivalency degree, everything from, maths to, there's some stuff around biology and cells, which I really loved. I loved that stuff around cells. Like, I love this biology stuff, but I'd also been thinking about, what I wanted to get out of university is a career and a job. And, as much as when I was a kid, I'd heard words like, geologist and astrophysicist and things, they weren't, real things. You'd never saw people with these jobs, but, you'd seen doctors and I knew I didn't want to be a doctor because it's not that I'm squeamish, but, I just didn't really, feel like I wanted to go down that path, but I loved animals because my great grandmother, had a bit of a farm and, I grew up in the wild with like goats as my best friends. so I was like, oh, I'll be a veterinarian. So I decided to enter like pre-veterinary medicine, and that coincided with, this new subject of biology. I discovered that where you studied cells. And so, I got studying zoology and botany and, everything that was associated with that course. And, I just, loved it. I still, kept up my interest. Like, I had to study, physics as well and literature, and I loved everything. I guess I never stopped loving everything, but I just had to pick a path that was going to lead to a career. And so biology was the one I chose. Yeah.
And I think you said that also being this reoccurring question in your head in relation to lifespan and, why do humans have to die? How do they die?
One of my big questions. Yeah. So and I think it comes from, being raised by my great grandmother, who was like, I'm she, couldn't physically do things because, she was old and, having to deal with this kid running around. And it was very much like, just go outside and play was her answer to everything. But at the same time, I was like, well, why do people get old? And people would just say, just because, and nobody had the answer. And I was like, well, there's got to be an answer to this, So that got to be my big question when I was in university. And I started doing, some research on the side, like reading articles and learning about things like cellular senescence and, different subjects like that were starting to look into the reasons for it. And it kind of drove my passion. I was still like, okay, I'll be a veterinarian and then maybe I'll study this aging stuff on the side. But, eventually it did occur to me that you could actually be a scientist and just study this stuff. And it was kind of a slow realization. I think that's something maybe a lot of students don't understand, because I see it all of the time in people that, are going to university or they're considering, oh, I should go into medicine because, maybe from medicine, I can, do something in the biology side or scientific side, but you don't have to, because there is this whole career path that's a scientist that actually, just studies, whatever your question is, whether it's aging or cancer or whatever the topic of interest is. And I didn't know that profession even existed until I was in university and was doing, I guess, my final year, which is kind of the equivalent of an honors here, where I got a placement in a virology lab. And they were working with vaccinia virus, which is a harmless form of smallpox, but using it to develop HIV vaccines. And so I got to learn, I had to do all the grunt work of entering papers in the database and, doing all of the stuff that, the junior people in the lab do. But at the same time, I got to go to lab meetings and, learn experimental design. I got to do, plasmid-based cloning. And, I got to really be a scientist for that year. And I was like, this is like the job for me. This is really fantastic. This is like a better career than a doctor or a veterinarian. This is like the stuff that, you ask questions and nobody knows the answer. So you go and find it. And so that set my path after that to go on to do a PhD. Yeah.
And at some point when you were still in the States, you came across this man that you admired called Professor Roger Mandel, and you hunted him down, some would say, because you were very interested in what he was doing and the other side of the world where he was based.
Yeah. Oh, so that's sort of like after the PhD. You skip the PhD, which is the hard part, and we're the whole like 5 years of a PhD, which I'm going to recommend to the people interested in science, even if change careers like I eventually did. A PhD is a level of study that I think is so good for you to, I would say, endure, because it is really tough, but it's really your chance to be an independent thinker and independent, scientist, and ask questions and find out the answers. And that was 5 years that I spent doing that in Seattle. So after I decided I wanted to do science, I looked for where were they doing aging research that interested me. And it was a great time, to try to get into a PhD, because they were actively recruiting. I flew out to Houston and they wanted to dine me and tried to get me into the PhD program there. And I went out to Seattle, and this is kind of a rare thing to do a PhD, because Seattle had a really popular interdisciplinary program that had applicants from all over the country, like hundreds of applicants. And there's like maybe 50 of us there that made it to final interviews. And somebody was telling me there's like, I don't know, 500 or 700 applications that didn't even make it to this point, and then they were only going to pick 12. And so I got to be one of the 12, which was really amazing that I made it through that hurdle. And so then you're stuck doing a PhD, and I don't want to do aging, but I had to. They forced you to go and like try out things in other labs to make sure, that's what you wanted to do. And I mean, I really enjoyed them as well. There's other lab experiments working with, X-ray crystallography and, trying to look at the structure of cataracts and drugs that counteract cataract formation, and, looking at cancer mutations and things. But yeah, I did end up in the aging lab because I'm very focused for a while. I'm very, very focused for a while. And after the aging lab, that's when I encountered Roger, because we were, it was a really leading lab for aging research with lots of great lectures and theoretical discussions and experiments, but they're kind of stuck in this way of thinking about aging that was all based around mutation. And I had discovered this new area called telomeres, because a friend of mine was working with yeast, and they had discovered some of the first genes that were involved in telomeres, and they found that these yeast cells, which are normally immortal cells that can grow forever, were suddenly dying, because they didn't have this gene. And I was like, wow, this is like really cool, because something like this exists in humans. And I did my reach out for a postdoctoral position after I finished my PhD. I got into Berkeley, I got into Philadelphia, but Roger's lab, I'd found out, was doing telomeres. And so I was like waiting, I was holding off the people in Philadelphia, just wait until I hear back from Australia. And they're like, Australia? And I was like, yeah. And there was other telomere labs in the US, but I also wanted to travel as well. So it was like the combination of telomeres and travel. So I finally heard back from Roger, and he offered me a position. So I was like, okay, I'm going to Australia. I've never been there, but I'll go to Australia and do my postdoc.
Yeah, and so for those of you who are watching our seminar who aren't from CMRI, Professor Roger Riddell is a cancer researcher, but also the director of our institute. And so you went straight into Roger's lab when you arrived in Australia. Talk to us about that and what work you're doing now.
So it was a really good time, I guess, to be in telomere research. It was really at the frontier, because like I said, all of the work had been done before in yeast and other organisms. And they had a collaborator of Roger's, actually in Canberra, had just cloned the human version of a crucial gene that's involved in telomeres. And Tracy in the lab, she had just completed her PhD and discovered the alternative lengthening mechanism of telomeres, which CMRI is famed for. And she went off to work with a Nobel laureate in the US, and then came back here after that, discovery. So a lot of really exciting telomere stuff was happening. And I got to be involved in, I almost got on the first paper where the human telomerase had been cloned, and we reported on. And there was 2 other papers overseas that were getting out at the same time, but our Australian paper came out third, and I almost got on there, but I didn't have my cell lines ready in time, so somebody else in the lab got on that paper. But so it was so close to being like one of these really top papers of all time. But I did do something to really help out the lab, because the clone that we had was actually missing a huge section of DNA I discovered. So I went and added that back in, so it was the proper full thing. So I fixed it up. And so the lab started working with that, which was human human telomerase, for many years afterwards. And I also, worked on developing the first antibodies against it. Like I learned how to design an antibody that would recognize a protein and use it for study. And the antibodies I designed, Scott Cohen used for, his Nature paper to demonstrate, the structure of telomerase. So, I got to be involved in some really exciting big stuff from the ground up at that period in time, which is a real privilege, I think. Sometimes it seems science gets stuck, but occasionally you have these jumps forward, and it's usually when you have some new technology you can take advantage of, and when you get in on the ground for something like that, you can really do some amazing things.
Well, you're talking to us with so much excitement, and I think everyone's like, "Oh, that sounds so exciting," and yet we know that you're our head of marketing. So what happened? At what point did you say, "Enough! I've had my time in the lab. I need a new challenge"?
Oh, it was. I loved research so much. I love bench science. But I think there is a certain period of time when you're a researcher, you have to decide, am I going to go on the path of being a lab head or not? And I made the choice that I didn't want to. And I always tell Roger this, which is a terrible thing, but I was like, I don't want to end up like you, Roger, because he had no work-life balance. he was, constantly writing grants and doing all this. And I can write a good grant, but, I didn't want to, have that experience. I loved the discovery and the learning of things. And, I didn't mind even, all the repetition of experiments that didn't work and struggling to figure it out and keep going. But, I started to kind of lose my interest in the kind of business side of science that wasn't as fun as just getting to work in the lab. And after a period of time, it's hard to find a position where you just get to work in the lab and not worry about those other things. You get pulled into writing more grants and having more responsibilities. So I was starting to lose a little bit of my interest in it. And then I was also tackling a topic, because how I get really dogged about things, I must do aging research. I had gotten really dogged about this TRF2 protein, which was just doing my head in, because I knew it was important, and we really just didn't have the technology at that time to show what it was doing. But I was trying all sorts of things and really struggling with it. And I since discovered, there were labs in New York and labs in San Diego that had burnt out postdocs on the same topic. So I wasn't the only postdoc in the world being burnt out, beating their heads against this topic. So it actually got to a point where, I thought I had come up with some really good experiments where I won an HMRC grant, which I wrote when I was in hospital with my son. So, that's how busy science keeps you. But so I was coming back, and I, could have continued that, but there's an opportunity that came up in science communications at that time. And, just kind of taking a step back, as much as I talk about my love of science, and parallel with that, I always had a love of books and reading and writing. So, I wrote my first little book in first grade that won, a regional award. And it was about an owl that was a wizard, and there was snakes involved, and there's a lightning bolt. And this was like long before Harry Potter. So I just want to say that that I had some really key elements in that story early on. But
that's not a journey that you often hear, and I don't think that's one that we've heard this week from other people in this seminar, is that you have always had this creative outlet going along at the same time that you've had the scientific interest.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I guess you could say I have maybe a bit of attention deficit, but I would get really focused on things, but at the same time, I would love so much other stuff. And even when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was writing a novel during the summers when I had time off from my studies. So, I guess when other people are going to summer break, it's I get out my typewriter, and this is before I had word processing. So it was type, white out and everything.
I've never heard Lorel tell this story, and I'm nodding my head because I work in her team, and I know that when she's not working, of course she's always writing a novel. You talk about a work-life balance.
Yeah, but I think there's I love science, I love learning, but science was my job, and how some people have a calling. Writing has always been my calling. It's that thing that when I do it, I just, at peace, and, nobody can bug me and like, oh, hours went by if you give me a chance. Sometimes I only get 30 minutes and I write as much as I can in those 30 minutes, but it's 30 minutes of bliss. So writing has always been my calling. And I started, and I kept that going even when I was doing my PhD, continuing, writing novels, which weren't very good, and because you have to learn by trial and error over time. But I also found that when I came to CMRI, especially, there was a lot more opportunity to, use that creative side as a scientist. Jennifer was here and always looking for volunteer scientists to, go out and explain things simply to the committees or, to people in the general public. And it's like, oh, this is, a great kind of writing lesson of how can I distill this really complex subject into something, simple enough for somebody else to be inspired by it and to understand it. And so it was kind of a mental puzzle challenge, writing challenge for me to try to do those explanations. And I started my own course. This is also why I was doing my postdoc, because you can never keep me on just one subject. When I was doing my PhD, I had to study some ancient Greek because I just got really bored just doing my PhD. So I took a semester of ancient Greek. But anyway, when I was doing my postdoc here, I was like, okay, I'm going to teach a course that explains some topics in science really plainly to the general public. So I designed a course that I held through the University of Sydney Centre for Continuing Education, and it was hot topics in bioscience. So I tackled things like GMOs and bioweapons and, these things that were like really big in the news at the time and scary to people. And I just wanted to explain simply, what's the science behind it? Because, science itself isn't scary. Sometimes it's like how you use it or misuse it. That's the issue. So, I held, I think I did it for about a year, a couple of semesters of this where I covered those topics. And I had, it was great to see because I had like parents who were homeschooling the kids bring their kids to that class. And so it was like full circle to try to teach them. But yeah, it was a great experience in communicating science. And I'd say it's creative because, first of all, you have to really understand science well to explain it simply. When people, fall back on jargon, it's because they can't translate it into, a very, simple analogy or a simple example. So it takes a lot of knowledge of science and a lot of creative puzzle figuring out to try to turn something really simple. And so I thought, oh, this is great. I love the science communication bit. And so when the science communication role came up, Roger told me about, they were actually kind of desperate because there was this new marketing department and nobody there knew anything about what the scientists were saying that couldn't translate. And Roger knew I was, a good communicator. And he's like, can you come and do this job? And I was like, I'll give up science and do this. And it's a really, really hard decision to make, and for years after making the transition, I missed the lab bench so much and used to dream about it. But it was also that whole excitement of starting something new and something very scary. And as much as I thought I knew about writing and communicating, it was like in the deep end when I joined the marketing team, because you have time to think in the lab. I think Kate was talking about that difference when you have a pager and you have no time of your own versus when you're in the lab and you have time to think. And it was kind of like that getting into marketing. There wasn't a pager, but there was deadlines, and there was we need this written now, this written now. It's just like, and it's like it wasn't as I guess mentally challenging as science, but it was really challenging in terms of you had to be quick, you had to, get faster and faster at things and do what had to be done in a period of time. And so I really felt that I was thrown in the deep end, and especially my boss. She used to be a former Coca-Cola marketing person, so she was no nonsense corporate that would tell me when I wasn't doing something right and do it better and faster. So it was a really good learning experience, and one that I stayed into. I've been doing it now for 10 years. I could maybe have moved on to something else, but I found something that I really liked.
No, everyone loves change, so we don't know how we can work at an institute without having our marketing guru also be a science guru, because it is like an incredible niche. And I would say to anyone, any young scientist or any scientist out there who is in the same headspace as Laurel, they're looking for a difference. It's such a unique skill set that you have to be able to combine those two things. Was it hard? You said you missed the lab, but you know, we're all in this one building here together and our offices are just, you know, a few meters away from the labs. Were there times where you were sort of wandering the corridors
Oh
or
yeah,
wandering the labs going, what have I done?
well, I felt like a little bit like, you know, put out because I didn't have my pipettes anymore or my lab bench where I could just go and mess around with things. But, you know, I still have lots of friends in the labs that I chatted to. And even to this day, you know, I still have the excitement of learning what they're working on and reading their papers and, you know, understanding that and translating it. So I get to kind of follow their journeys, which is really good. But yeah, you do miss the lab when you make the transition because, well, for me, it was such a weird adjustment because I'd never had an office job. You know, I grew up in a lab. and so I was like, what do people even do on a computer all day? You know, and then I discovered what it was like emails. I was like, oh my God. But it was a difficult transition from like, you know, kind of in your formative years doing one thing and then having to learn something else entirely. But it was good because, you know, more than just my writing skills and my scientific, you know, knowledge, I was able to transfer over, you know, kind of a hypothesis testing to marketing. That was the part I really liked about marketing. It was sort of drawing on, like, of course I have interest in psychology too. So it was like drawing on interests in, you know, in how do people understand things and how do we convey to them, you know, science more clearly or get them to care about it, or how do we, like when I was doing my master's in marketing, I was, you know, writing papers on, you know, how do we sell hope? Is it a product? Is it a service? You know, people were not even thinking about, like, you know, we think about our research products in the long term, but right now, you know, people invest in it because they're investing in hope. So I was doing papers around these things that nobody else was doing when I was doing my marketing degree. So I got to translate, I guess, that discipline I had from a PhD to doing marketing. And I remember working on the first 1 in 20 TVC commercial. So we've got like the stat up here, but Jeans for many years had been, you know, denim and, you know, just fun stuff. And yet we had this knowledge that there's like 1 in 20 kids that were, you know, affected by a birth defect or genetic disease. And how can we get it out there? And my boss at the time was like, you know, which commercial do we do? And I was like, can we do both and test? And this is very scientific, you know, let's test. And we did. And the 1 in 20 was the one that everybody responded to. You know, the media outlets picked it up. We got so much free coverage, free pro bono placement and advertising with that. And it taught me that, you know, you can apply some science to marketing as well. And it also, I think, put me in touch with how you can help science, not necessarily being at the bench, but by helping researchers with funding, you know, making life easier on them so they, you know, don't have to work so hard for grants and they can actually have that thinking time that they need at the bench. So, so it was a very rewarding, you know, transition.
Other than the actual scientific knowledge, which is so incredible that you bring that to our team, what else do you think that you bring that from having that scientific background? Like, what have you learned in the bench or as part of research you think helps you in your job today?
Oh, I think it's the whole independence. Like I said, a PhD is, you know, it's like, you know, being thrown out, okay, go swim for yourself and figure this out. Because when you do a PhD, you're not learning from a textbook. You know, you are given some question that no one in the world has answered. And you have to figure out, well, how am I going to answer this? You know, what experiment should I try? What's my hypotheses to prove or disprove? You know, what do I do if it doesn't work? You know, what's my backup plans and all of this? So that independence and ability to tackle something that no one's ever done before can apply to other roles as well. Like I said, with marketing, for me, it was like, you know, getting out the 1 in 20 and trying to promote science in a way that hadn't been done before here. And for me, it's that same sort of pioneering, you know, a spirit of like, let's test, let's see, you know, can we change things? You know, it's about making the future better, because through science, you know, you're making discoveries that are going to lead, you know, to treatments and cures to make the world better, even just greater understanding. But when, you know, you do marketing for good, because I always hear people talk, like Roger calls it the dark art of marketing. And it's not a dark art if you apply marketing for good. And that's what I think is worthwhile about what I'm doing is how can, you know, we go out there and compete with these, you know, big companies that are just selling stuff that that people don't need, and get the attention of everyone to make them understand that research is important.
What would you say to people out there considering a change in career and looking outside of the lab? You know, was it, obviously it's a scary thing for you know, Anae, Kate and yourself, who've been our speakers this week. It's all been about the change in the science career. And as you said, there's so many different directions that you can work in with a scientific background. What would you say to people who might be considering a change, not necessarily to marketing, but just anywhere?
No, I think, just go for it. I mean, first of all, I want to encourage women to study STEM subjects. Go in there. You might it might stick and you want to be like a bench scientist forever or a lab head, and you could have some amazing discovery that's going to change the world. So go for it. But if you do find that it's not for you, that like PhD level training I said is so useful for the rest of your life and can be applied to other things. So, I know people that after they got their PhD, they've gone on to do commercialization, and promote research and get it translated actually into pharmaceutical treatments and therapies. I know, someone who went to Wall Street and just used his knowledge from the lab to advise on biotech stocks. And I know people that, have become professors at university, and, there's just so many different and maybe even unexpected careers out there that you can apply your science knowledge in. So if you love science, go for science. And if it turns out not to be for you, it's not the end of the world. Everybody changes their careers these days. Nobody usually sticks in the same job anymore. So you can switch direction.
And I think the other thing too that we're trying to get across this week is not just encouraging young women to look at STEM, but to perhaps, I suppose, look at it from a non-traditional perspective of, well, number one, it doesn't have to be a male-dominated focus. So when we look at, I think in Australia, we have an incredible amount of male students that are studying, and yet we end up with lots of women working in the labs. So it's just about getting more young women to actually study in the first place. But then, as you said, to realize that it doesn't just have to be this highly technical focused career. It can be a step in a door to so many different places. And it sounded like for yourself as a young woman, like you hadn't really considered all the doors that it could open. If you looked back on yourself at that point, did you ever feel, as you said, you had so many disadvantages you had to deal with. Did you ever feel like you were constrained by your gender at any point?
No, I mean, I'd have to say, looking back, I probably didn't have a lot of female professors. I think I can maybe remember one or two, or lab heads, female lab heads at that time. But I do have to say all of, my male mentors were really encouraging, and they weren't holding me back. I know once you go into academia, and you get out of, I don't know, probably the rough side of life, you encounter like intelligent, educated people that, want to help, women and help you in your career. So you're going to, not have that as an obstacle. It's all on you then, of like you having, the will to go forward and the courage to, do what you want to do and follow your dream, and not worry that, you're making a mistake, or, you're not going to have time for family, whatever. You'll fit it in. You fit everything in. There's like, as I can attest to, you can find time for anything in the day. And if you just, as Anae said, follow your passion and don't give up on it, to fall back to the safe choice, then you can go anywhere. And I think it's really improved now. I see many more, female professors, like some of my, colleagues from my PhD, like I said, have gone on to be professors. They work in biotech companies and manage things. And right here, we have lots of female lab heads, and the number is growing. And I think, just as more women gain that confidence and step forward and claim those roles is when you're going to see more of them.
I'm going to open up to the room and to online. If any questions come through online, let me know. But we've got some questions in the room here for Laurel.
Hello, Kate.
It's fascinating to hear your story. It sounds like you've achieved so much in all of the careers that you've been in. Is there one particular achievement or discovery or, I don't know, advertising campaign or one thing in particular that you're most proud of or most resonates with you?
It's really hard because I'm proud of lots of things. You know, you want to do something that you're proud of, you know, whenever you're working on something, you put your whole heart into it. So I'm proud of, you know, everything I've done, you know. I'd say, like, you know, in my current role, yeah, I would mention the Genes for Genes advertising campaign now, because, you know, I did the experiment with the 1 in 20 and it, you know, tested really well with media, but, you know, it was still a while to, you know, bring that to life in the current campaign. You know, I did this whole TV campaign around promoting CMRI and children's genetic diseases. And, you know, we went like viral and got millions of views online. You know, it was like a fantastic success, but it's like, no, I've got to like keep pushing this further. And it suddenly dawned on me when I was doing an annual report, and I, you know, had enough contacts with some of the families that we deal with and different kids with different genetic diseases. Is like, why are we, you know, using actors? You know, we've got these like amazing kids that, you know, people don't necessarily see that they have a genetic disease because it's not obvious, but let's put them in, you know, this annual report. And then it came to, well, let's put them in the commercials and you know, show to the world, you know, this is like, you know, an average kid you'd see on the street, and you don't realize that he's sick and he needs help.
5 years later, it's still going strong.
Yeah.
And all the families that have their children involved in the campaigns just love it because, yeah, they're not actors, but they feel like, you know, superstars. So that is something you should be proud of.
Yeah, and it hit close to home to me as well, because, you know, when my son was diagnosed with autism, I was like, gosh, I'm one of the statistics. And but then it, you know, really pushed me more to say, you know, we got to advocate for these kids.
Some more questions from the room?
Laurel, can you tell us a bit about your PhD? What was that?
So that was in A gene, but it was actually really exciting. I'll tell you about the result. So this was back before the Human Genome Project, and it was really a lot of hard work to do DNA sequencing. I had to do it manually. You know, nobody nowadays like does this. You send it off to a company and they zip and read your DNA sequences for you. But I had to create the chemical cocktails of dideoxy sequencing and, you know, run my PCRs and stuff and run them out on these radioactive gels. I dealt with a lot of radiation and put them up against X-ray films, and then like get my ruler out and like sequence like, okay, so that is C and then a G and then a T. So you're like really reading the DNA code closely, but it wasn't, you know, I was just going to do this once. I was looking at trends and mutations in human aging. And so we had a resource of human kidney that had been donated from various sources. Sometimes it was a bit of normal tissue when somebody had cancer and we were given the normal tissue, or it was rejected transplant kidneys that couldn't be used. So we would grow up these cells, and I just looked at one gene because we could select for cells that had a mutation in this housekeeping gene called HPRT. And so I would grow up, you know, lots of clones, and each clone would have a different mutation. So I would have to sequence that gene in all of those different clones. And I'd usually do, I don't know, 10 or 20 per patient. And then, you know, I had lots of patients, and I was doing these like graphs to see, okay, first of all, what's the mutation rate? And we found that mutation rate increases tenfold as you age. And then even in the normal tissue of people that had cancer, their mutation rate was tenfold higher than that. So, you know, there's something got wrong in people that get cancer in terms of like the elevation in mutation rate. And then sequencing the genes, I was looking at what types of mutations were they, like, you know, deletions, translocations, transitions, transversions, trying to like get a profile of what was causing the mutations. And you could see people that were smokers had these like nasty like mutation profile, never ever smoke, I tell you. And then, you know, normal aging had a certain like, you know, mutation profile. And then people that got cancer had sort of in between mutation profile. So it was really interesting to look at, you know, this stuff that was happening in the background all of the time to our DNA over time. And you can see, how cells are struggling to repair this and keep growing and maintaining their viability, after the onslaught of, especially smoking, but whatever else you're doing to yourself. And then just the ravages of time and random, mutation from, background radiation and everything. So I really dived into DNA and what causes mutations, what mutations look like, and trying to, kind of do an investigative, trick of like, okay, as you age, what's causing it? And the answer is, lots of different things.
Listen to you now, Laurel, and I just think there must be days in your current job where you must roll your eyes at us and think, really, this is not,
important.
This is not important. This is not, a really big thing that we need to stress about.
This is how I keep all of you calm. I'm like, let's put this in context, okay? It's not that big a deal. We'll get through this.
Do you think that does definitely help you, like having had such an intense job for so long? And obviously your current job is intense, but as you said, in a different way.
Yeah, I think it does help, to always have perspective and things. But no matter what you're doing, even when, I was doing science, it's like, it's the end of the world if I don't get, this experiment done and things. And it's not the end of the world, like most of the time. I think, like Kate, working with patients and people's lives in your hands, that's like a lot more stress, which is part of the reason I never wanted to be a medical doctor. I didn't want to have people's lives in my hands. But when you don't have people's lives in your hands, you can, think about things a little bit more with perspective. And I think it helps to not get, embroiled in, the short term and take, bigger look at it. And I even found this in science that, I remember my supervisor one time was designing this whole complex experiment for something. And I just took a step back and was like, I don't think we have to do that, because we could just look at female cells, or male cells, like, because where you have one or two copies of the gene. It's like, oh, okay, then you just like erase the blackboard. But it's like, take that step back and think about it before, you get too deep into the details. Yeah.
That's great life advice for every situation, I think. Does anyone have any more questions before we wrap up?
It's yours. I don't have that cup of tea.
Just for everyone at home, in case they can't hear, that's just she needs a cup of tea.
And Jennifer is my role model for energy. I don't people online won't be able to see Jennifer, but you're 80 something or 80 young. Yeah, 80 and boundless energy. Whenever Jennifer is taking me around on science talks, running to keep up with her. So she's an example of energy.
Well, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks from all of us for organising this series, because I know that all of us have enjoyed it. And I know Anae, who did it on Monday, and Kate, who did it on Tuesday, and yourself as well. Like, we've had a lot of feedback from people. So thank you to everyone who's emailed us and said that they've enjoyed it. I think we wanted to really show the story of people's science journey, because all these wonderful people are used to presenting at seminars and talking about their work, and they don't necessarily like talking about themselves, which is like why Laurel didn't send an all-staff email to everyone at CMRI today to remind them to come, because she doesn't necessarily like talking about herself. But they're really important stories to tell, because there's someone who's feeling alone and lost and confused about what to do with their career, whether it be the beginning, the middle, or perhaps towards the end of their career. And sharing their stories, I think, can really make people feel supported and maybe refocus their energy. So thank you for organising it. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for everyone for being part of it.
Thank you.